This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the famous Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Greetings from Macon.
Now, I won't get into any conversation about your political ambitions, but I'm going to just put that under the rug for right now. And
I've really tried to resist that all these years, but based on the current climate of what's happening up in the swamp, there is no way that I would subject myself to any of that.
No, I don't know. I don't necessarily believe that, but I'll let it pass for now.
No way.
Let it pass. So, we'll maybe be drafted at some point. Well, I know you're a student of the Supreme Court, and you've devoted a lot of your life to understanding its workings and its role in the American political system. And we've been through a vicious, terrible confirmation process for Judge Kavanaugh that just put the country back on its heels. And do you have any comments about this? Is this a usual process? Is this? And I know you've observed the Supreme Court for the whole history of our country. Has there ever been anything that approached this?
Nothing remotely. The closest you could possibly come would be the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas affair about 25 years ago, and I think that does not come close to this one. This was just horrendous. Nobody got out of this with cleanly, and I don't see anything good to have come of it at all.
Well, it seems like, if I can understand what's supposed to happen, is this advising consent by the Senate for the nominees for the Supreme Court, put there by the president. His job is to put people on the Supreme Court. Now, in the past, how did the vetting go? I mean, what happens? You're the president. I'm going to put somebody on the Supreme Court. Well, is there presumably there's a major amount of vetting that's taking place? Is the person smart enough, erudite enough? Is there any thing in his background or her background that would make it a difficult person to put on there? Am I going to try and balance the makeup of the court in regards to sectionalism or life experiences? How am I going to do this? And what has the process traditionally been like, going back 100 years or 200?
About as different from what we have seen in the last few weeks as you can imagine. Originally, hearings were not even held for most of the history of the court. The president would submit the name, and the Senate would debate it, and then up or down. There was no real attempt to serve different constituencies on the Supreme Court. The big thing I think you would have seen prior to the 70s, the 80s, perhaps the 60s, was geographic representation. That generally speaking, you tried to have justices from different regions of the country. And I suppose to a degree you still do, but I think the big difference started coming with the appointment of Thurgood Marshall to the Supreme Court by Lyndon Johnson in the 60s, the first African-American justice. He had been a famed civil rights lawyer. He played a major role in that group of civil rights lawyers who had systematically attacked segregation and gotten the Supreme Court to hear the Brown versus Board case. Then, of course, you had Sandra Day O'Connor, first female justice named by Reagan in 1981. And that came at the same time that some of the real hot-button issues were really starting to bubble up. And at that point, by that time, you actually had confirmation hearings in which the justices or potential justices were questioned. They were questioned on the hot-button issues. The hearings became increasingly partisan until you finally get what we have had with now Justice Kavanaugh.
Well, it's become a verb, I guess, borking, if I can use it like
yes.
that. The idea, what happened there, if I can understand this? Well, before getting into that, has it been a common event for the Senate not to approve a nominee for the Supreme Court? Is there much of a history of that taking place?
It's certainly not unknown. In recent times, some of the better known ones was you had Nixon nominating a Georgian, I believe, Harold Carswell. Yeah, and that would have been 72 or thereabouts. And there were some issues there, and the Senate said no, and then they said no to someone else about that time. There was discussions about elevating Abe Fortas to the Chief Justiceship, and that didn't happen.
No,
the big one was Bork.
Yes.
And I need to give some backstory to that. We've talked about judicial activism before
yes.
on here, and to remind the audience of what we're talking about. Today, when you hear activism, you usually hear the connotation of liberal activism.
Yes.
And activism is when, essentially, to put it blatantly, when a judge rules in such a way as to make the law say what he thinks it ought to say, what he would like it to say, rather than what it is.
Yes.
And activism can be either liberal or conservative. In the late 19th, early 20th centuries, activism was often very heavily conservative. Starting really with the Earl Warren Court in the 1950s, activism was heavily liberal, and the court discovered various constitutional rights that nobody
yes.
had realized. And the big one was the right to privacy, and very closely connected to the right to privacy was the right to abortion. And this is an extremely hot button issue. When you're talking sexuality, when you're talking pregnancy,
right, yes.
this pushes people's buttons. And so the Supreme Court, which was heavily dominated by liberal activism, eased these things in without a lot of furor. And then you got the moral majority backlash coming into the 70s and
yes.
the 80s. The court was very closely divided. Reagan had been elected largely on the strength of the moral majority. He nominates Robert Bork to the Supreme Court in the mid-80s. It becomes perfectly clear, based on Bork's judicial philosophy and on what Bork said at confirmation, if he had been confirmed, he would have voted against Roe versus Wade, and he would have been the deciding vote. And the Democrats, for whom abortion is really almost an article of faith at this point, said absolutely not. And they turned down Bork not on the basis of his qualifications, but purely on the basis of his ideology.
Now, is that unusual?
It may have happened before, but if it had, I'm not aware of it.
Now, it did a mistake that he made that apparently hasn't happened recently, is that you're not supposed to say what you think. Is that right?
Yes. Well,
so you have to be a little. Apparently, he did. Is that right? And powerfully so.
Yes.
But
Go ahead.
So I mean, the idea was they were trying to lure him into making some kind of statement about where his views would go, and I'm assuming they were counting votes also. So there's a lot of vote counting going on,
yes.
and the Democrats had the ability to stop him, and they did. And they savaged him, did they not? It's a real savage. And although there was no challenge to his moral, there's no allegations of moral turpitude about his behavior or anything. You know, he was still an honorable person, but he was just his viewpoints were contrary to what people thought, and it was needed on the Supreme Court.
Yes, it was very highly politicized. We don't like your political views, therefore we're not putting you on the court. I must say that the court had invited that kind of reaction based on the fact that it had very much entered the political thicket over the preceding 30 years. And if you act like a politician, then you're going to be treated like a politician.
Well, now let's discuss that.
Yes.
That turns out to be a big deal, in my opinion. So what's been going on with our country is, obviously, we have these tectonic plates that are moving. We have terrible tensions and change, and there are all kinds of different events that are taking place. Demographics are different, family structure is different, religious viewpoints are different, language is even different, all kinds of differences that are appearing. And having some kind of a unity of purpose in the country is difficult, and it's certainly, we discussed this before, very hard to put a constitutional amendment through in general. So the Supreme Court has, in many ways, just turned into a secret, I would say that, a secret propagator of constitutional amendments. Huge decisions that have only a very small relationship with the Constitution, law, or anything that the 9 people on the Supreme Court think are necessary for the welfare of the country.
Well, that 5 of the 9.
Well,
yes,
5 of the 9.
Did you
so
say
we have
that?
a restricted number of people that, because of the arrangements that have taken place, the vetting that's occurring, you're getting a very narrow group of people with narrow, in my opinion, narrow viewpoints that are from the urban Northeast that are connected to Ivy League law schools.
Just one or two Ivy League law schools.
Right.
Really, Harvard is the...
It's difficult to go 50 miles outside of New York or Washington or Boston. I mean, the rest of the country is out here.
Yes.
And the general cultural milieu there is not the same as the rest of the country, and they seem to be propagating all kinds of things. And that some of the tension in the country has arisen from that, and maybe we're seeing that played out in the confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh. Now we've sort of gone in this direction. A person watching this on television, I would just frankly horrified. I'll say that it was a horrible exhibition of terrible, in many ways, falsehoods, unsubstantiated allegations, and it played itself into gender tensions in some kind of unknowable way, and it's just not the kind of process that I think is appropriate for the country or the Supreme Court. And presumably what would happen, and I understand this is what does happen, is that when people go into these positions, there is some kind of vetting that's taking place. If you done some terrible thing in the past, did you not pay your taxes, or did you run over 3 people, or whatever? I mean, they've done that.
Yes,
and
of course.
And so the public is protected in general circumstances.
Yes.
From someone that's a real rascal or somebody that just has appalling moral behavior.
Yes.
The public has some protection from that.
Yes. Well, there are several levels and layers of protection here. One of the first levels, of course, is that to be a lawyer, especially after Watergate and the lawyers doing all the bad things, professional responsibility became much more serious, and being entitled even to sit for the bar exam, you have to be investigated to a degree. Lawyers are under ethical obligations to rat each other out if they actually know that there is something in the character or behavior that makes them unfit to be officers of the court. There had been previous FBI investigations, and you would assume, especially since Bork and especially since Clarence Thomas, one of the first questions that a president or a presidential staff member is going to ask is, what skeletons have you got?
I'm sure
Do not embarrass us.
I'm sure that's the case. And
yes.
and no matter what your ambitions were, I think a person would say, well, I did have, 3 DUIs last year or whatever. I mean, I wouldn't be worth it with any skeletons out there,
yes.
and that for that position to even consider doing it.
Yes, but on the other hand, politicians crave power. They do. I've gotten to the point where I don't trust anyone who actually seeks office because I believe they're doing it for the wrong reasons. And
that's why you need to. I've noticed that you're not seeking office, Bucky, and so possibly.
And I'm just not going there. So I'm not going there.
Right, yes.
But I do think that we ought to draft people and make them serve.
Which is not the case ever. I mean, when people want to become judges, they have to pursue the judgeship, don't they? Isn't that the case?
Yes.
No one is going to just be sitting in their law office and then they knock on the door and we've decided we want you to be judge.
Even if you look at politicians from the founding era, that they gave a great charade of being drafted, and it was not even called running for office. You would stand for office. You would be convinced to stand for office.
Yes.
So, and now they run.
Right.
They pursue it.
Right. Yes.
So yes, it is not without the realm of possibility that a Kavanaugh or somebody like a Kavanaugh would have a skeleton, but also to think, oh, they'll never find that. It was 35 years ago. So if I don't tell, it'll never surface.
Well, I mean, now it's been said, let us ask this question.
Yes.
Do you think his position is safe on the Supreme Court with our political tensions that we have? Do you think he might be impeached?
I do not. I think that there is, and this was a perfect storm of a nomination, that the Democrats either located or manufactured, and we may never know the truth, something that had to be taken seriously, even if there was nothing to it. It polarized the Senate like nothing else I've ever seen. It polarized America. And the Democrats claimed that the truth was never allowed to come out. They said we have to have an FBI investigation. The Republicans, Jeff Flake, gave them an FBI investigation. Then the Democrats said it wasn't enough of an investigation, et cetera, et cetera. If the House flips, and we were recording this in October of 2018,
yes.
the election midterms are less than a month away, there's a good chance that the House will flip and become Democratic. The House is the one that gets to impeach. If the House becomes Democratic, I think it's going to be because they played this issue and that the issue played well among the base. And so it would seem to me natural that the next step would be to impeach Kavanaugh, because that would force an open, extremely high-profile trial that everybody would see. And even if there's no chance of him getting convicted, and unless the Democrats can come out with something absolutely ironclad like perjury, then he's not going to be convicted, because it takes a 2/3 vote in the Senate. And there's no way you're going to have 2/3 of the Senate be Democratic this next cycle. But at least it airs what's going on. And it gets the donations going, and maybe they get lucky. So I think there's an excellent chance that you will see Kavanaugh impeached.
Well, I just have to say publicly that it is absolutely absurd for the politicians that I'm aware of and knowing something about their past moral behavior, some I won't name names, to stand up and cast stones. I mean, the sin, the cloud of sin that hangs over the moral behavior of our politicians, if you were to go in, I mean, not everyone, but certainly we're investigating the teenage experiences of a number of sitting U.S. senators. Something is going to emerge, and it is and so basically it's kind of a something like the guillotining people in the French Revolution. I mean, you just have to be an aristocrat to have your head cut off. Well, you just have to be a conservative in a way to have your head cut off, or at least have your right foot cut off. I can phrase it that way. So it's a terrible thing for our country, and is the solution for the Supreme Court to become less a role player in our national political discourse? I mean, not to make law, but to sort of interpret law.
I don't think you can put that genie back in the bottle. Even if the Supreme Court really backed away from activism and really started going down the road of restraint, it is shown that it has the institutional potential to have tremendous power if it becomes activist. And so it's going to be a prize to be fought over, even if it tries to withdraw from politics. It reminds me of that wonderful, ominous quotation from Trotsky: "You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you."
That's pretty good. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
even the court cannot go back. It's even if it tries to, it's going to be dragged into the political fray now, and I don't know. Everybody's got something, and this is certainly not on a single party. There's Al Franken, there's Weiner, so yeah, everybody's a target now. And if we are not going to go the route of due process, the allegation itself becomes the judgment and the condemnation, and no one is safe from allegation. So I don't know if Kavanaugh did it. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But
well, I have friends, I've had friends that are Democrats, and this is just the wrong way to do it. That's my comment about it. Free comment about the psyche of the nation. I mean, presumably what could happen is you just go through the political arrangements and you do this and you do that. And I think what has transpired, as I understand it, is how the country is changing, is you have the court decisions. The other thing that happens is the so-called deep state, if you want to say it like that. Congress passes broad laws, very broad ones, and then the administrators propagate rules, and the rules haven't been vetted by any kind of voters. So in a way, there's kind of a faux democracy here at work. The idea is, well, I'm a voter, I'd like this to happen or like that to happen. The power of the individual voter has been muted so much by the courts and by the bureaucracy that subserves the will of the executive, that in many ways the Congress, which is the most direct, I guess you could say, expression of the people's will, has become far less powerful. I mean, do you have any thoughts? Executives
yes.
more powerful, courts are more powerful?
Yeah, I would make one amendment, and you speak of the deep state. Then you say the bureaucracy serves the will of the executive. I'm not sure that's true. I think the bureaucracy serves the will of itself now.
I accept the correction. I think that's a good point.
And it may not be intentional on the part of many bureaucrats. There's certainly probably some intent. You know, the anonymous article that was produced by the New York Times saying that we thought about declaring Trump incompetent. But it's also just a matter of pure inertia. You have 2 million people who do not report. They do not report to the American voter.
Yes.
And they do their jobs, and it takes an awful lot of time and energy to try to change the course of that. It's like
Yes.
trying to change a glacier. Congress could do it. Congress could abolish the Department of Education
Yes,
tomorrow.
yes.
Congress could, but Congress has shown that Congress, you can't look to Congress to do anything like that. They are interested in. It's a game of temporal musical chairs.
Yes.
And they are hoping to get out and get their exorbitant pensions without the music stopping during their term of office.
Yes, I think they find a way to get a few shekels as time goes by.
Yeah.
Well, what is going to happen with the courts now? So presumably, I'm not sure this is the case, but there's a 5-4 conservative liberal arrangement. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's not.
Well, if I can speak to that for just a moment. When the Democrats have nominated Clinton, Obama, for instance, the people that they have nominated, they keep that party disciplined. They nominate people on the left and people pretty far on the left. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for whom I have very few kind words, and it's not about her judicial philosophy. They're pretty far to the left, and they keep that discipline. They stay left. If you look at Republican nominations since Nixon, half of them defect to the left, or at least to the moderate left. And I don't know if that's the Republicans trying to play the pro-life vote, trying to stretch out this just one more vote to milk votes, or if they just pick bad ideologues. But looking at historical batting averages, there was only a 50-50 chance that Kavanaugh would be a conservative vote. I think the way the Democrats have played it, they've guaranteed that he'll be a conservative vote now. And that speaks very badly both of the Democrats in terms of strategy and in terms of Kavanaugh, because he's letting his decision-making be clouded by partisanship. So there's no guarantee of this. But I think, getting back from the digression, you're right. I think we've certainly got 5 conservative votes now. So.
Well, now the Democrats are saying, at least in some circles, not all circles, but that's delegitimized the Supreme Court.
It does. Absolutely.
So in other words, and it would be like I don't know, in the South when the Warren Court there were and they outlawed segregation. Yes. I can well remember signs everywhere.
Impeach or Warren.
Impeach or Warren, on and on. We don't accept the ruling of the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Are we going to go into something like that where people are not on the left would not accept whatever the court did or did not say? And do we already have enough problems with the states and cities setting up sanctuary arrangements not following federal law? We have that, I think, with marijuana. There are states that say, well, we don't care what the feds do. We're doing this. Centrifugal force. A diverse country that has no central matrices of common faith, I guess you'd say that. It's pretty destructive, isn't it?
Yes.
If you think I think in former days, the idea was, well, we've got 9 smart, moral people up there that have devoted themselves to understanding the Constitution. And if something is amiss that protects American citizens, they're going to rectify it. And I don't think we can think that, or at least many people cannot. They think, well, this is just a party organization.
You got 9 politicians.
They pay no attention really to the law. It's a charade when they go in, and that's what people might think. And that's a real bad thing. Now, just to continue on this, I've heard it said that Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice Roberts, is aware of this danger and is making all sorts of efforts to preserve the role of the Supreme Court in that light. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, that's a laugh. His reasoning in the Obamacare cases were so disingenuous.
Yes.
That I have no respect for the man. I'm sorry that he should have just come out and said what he was doing. And it was and I have said, and I've gone on record, that if somebody had played the word games in one of my law classes that he played with the Obamacare decision, I would have given him an F.
Yes.
That was just unconscionable. So it was just intellectually dishonest. That was my problem. I think what we've got, I think we are seeing the opening shots of a new civil war here. And I will qualify that in a minute, but I'll tell you why I think that. We now have 3 justices who, in particular, I mean, aside from the institution itself being under the cloud, you have 3 justices who are under a very serious cloud. You have Kavanaugh, who I do not believe will be accepted his votes will not be accepted as legitimate by the left. And if it's an abortion decision, it's going to be quite, I believe, literally blood on the walls. That is going to dredge back up Clarence Thomas. He's going to get dragged back into this.
He has been brought up again.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. So they're under a cloud on the right. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who abandoned any pretense of impartiality by her absurd behavior during the 2016 campaign. That if the code, I cannot believe that the Code of Judicial Conduct does not apply to the Supreme Court, because she would have been disqualified. She'd have to recuse herself forever based on what she has done. So I think that when I say civil war, the big race issue, race has always been geographically determined. Slavery was working really well with an agricultural climate, long growing seasons.
Maybe, but okay.
No, it really, I mean, slavery existed as far north as Massachusetts in the 1600s,
yes.
But it just didn't take up there. It didn't work with an industrial system.
Yes.
So it was geographically determined. And Southern whites had control of Southern states, and they could use that power. So we had the war between the states.
Yes.
You had desegregation, which had a very strong geographical angle. You don't see that with abortion. You don't see that with the culture wars. To a degree, yes, Democrats are more powerful on the coasts and up east, but it's not that cut and dried. So the civil war that I'm afraid we will see is more of a urban guerrilla-style warfare with no legitimacy on either side. And I really see that happening. I mean, you're already seeing riots in Portland over the weekend. You saw women literally clawing at the doors of the Supreme Court building when Kavanaugh was being sworn in. I fear for the country. I really do.
Well, let's think about something that I'd like to think about, more pleasant subject, but we can continue along those lines. What would happen, obviously Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a very elderly person who in frail health, as far as what can be determined, and so I believe she's 85 or maybe even older.
Yes,
and so,
she's had great health issues, cancer.
Right, she's had, and a fragile person just to see her.
Yes.
She's far up in age and frail, and so obviously at some point she's going to won't be able to serve. And now, if in fact, just to ask the question, if she was in ill health and in the hospital, what would happen? In other words, does she get to stay on the Supreme Court as long as she wishes? So she's just in a nursing home, shall we say, or comes in, they sort of wheel her in or to cast a vote, and then off she goes. Where are we in that? Is there any way that a Supreme Court justice, and there could be others too, that grow so old and grow so frail that they can't intellectually do their job, but they insist on staying there? What is the
I am not aware of any system that has ever been used other than peer pressure to get a judge to leave the bench in a situation like that. I mean, usually they get the message themselves. There are some possibilities, but I don't know if they've ever been used or ever be floated. And if somebody tried in this environment, once again, there'd be blood on the walls.
Well, a final question is, all right, so let's suppose that President Trump is there, and it's time to appoint another Supreme Court justice, and the Democrats control the Senate. Would it be that it would just be impossible ever to put a person through? And we get into it that as if we had that much of a schism, that there would never be a we're going to have 8 justices or 7 or whatever. There's just no way to get it. Could happen.
I think it really could. I don't know if it will, but I think it's a very likely scenario.
Well, Bucky, I regret that the country has come to this end, and I hope that, I've said this before, people of goodwill step forward to preserve the circumstances. And in all the absence of civility that we see everywhere on the streets, in public discourse, that some kind of common sense reasserts itself, and the country is going to be ill-served by continuing flashes of anger, such as we've seen.
Where are the better angels of our nature?
Yes. And on that note, Bucky, we'll talk some more. Thank you for your appearance tonight. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.